Hey guys, Chef Scott here for Devil's Food Kitchen. Today we are sharpening knives. I'm excited about this one. I love to sharpen my knives. I think it's a really important skill for serious cooks to learn, especially if you have nice knives. Keeping your knives sharp is going to keep your knives in good condition. They'll last longer. It's also really safe. The sharper a knife, the less effort you need to use to cut through product. And as soon as you have to force something with a dull knife, you risk losing control and cutting yourself. So it's always a good idea to have really sharp knives. I'm going to go through a lot of different equipment here, and so as always, links will be in the description to all of those different things. If you're already semi-experienced knife sharpener and you just want to know the method, you can go ahead and skip forward in the video and I'll show you that. But for anybody who's brand new to this and doesn't know where to start, we're going to talk about all of the equipment that you need to sharpen your knives. So let's get started. The first step in getting your knives sharp is understanding what tools you need to do the job. So we're going to do a little bit of an unboxing here. I'm going to show you all the tools I use to sharpen and explain why I have them. Of course, you need a knife. That's a no-brainer, right? This knife is not something I generally use in my kit, but it's really dull. I haven't sharpened it in a long time, so it's a great candidate for a good sharpening. And before I open this up and show you all of my tools, it's important to kind of explain what sharpening really is. If you looked at the cutting edge of your blade from dead on and close up, it would look something like a V. You've got a bevel from either side of the blade coming to a point, and that fine point is your cutting edge. The more defined that is, the sharper the knife. Over time, that edge will start to dull out and round over. That's a dull knife, and we need to get back to that point. So really, sharpening is very simple. We're taking our blade and rubbing it against a coarse surface to remove metal from the knife, and that is going to sharpen both sides of that bevel on both sides of the blade and give you a good cutting edge. So the way we do that is with sharpening stones. That's the first thing we're going to talk about. I like to keep all my tools in one location. These little plastic boxes are really handy to do that. They're small, they don't take up a lot of space, it keeps everything safe inside. So I highly recommend getting one if you're going to get some good stones. These are my sharpening stones, and I use wet stones. There are two major types of sharpening stones, wet stones and oil stones. Wet stones use water as a lubricant for the knife blade, and oil stones use oil. Now, I prefer wet stones because water is cheaper than oil and it's a lot easier to clean up. So once you've chosen the style of stone, they're going to come in a wide variety of grits. And you can think of the grit of a stone like the grit of sandpaper. The lower the grit, the coarser the stone is going to be and the more material it's going to take from your knife. The higher the grit, the denser the stone is going to be, and the more it's going to polish your blade. So I think a great place to start is with a 1000 grit stone. This one's made from King. I think they make pretty good stuff. And this 1000 grit is going to do the bulk of my sharpening. I then have a 6000 grit stone, which is going to do all of my polishing and finishing on the edge. So if I were to recommend two stones to get started, it would be a 1000 grit and a 6000 grit. Now, of course, there's a lot of other options out there. It's really up to you. The higher the grit, generally the more expensive the stone gets. I have here what's known as a combination stone, and that's because it's two different stones that are fused into one block. And you can see this is a 300 grit and a 1000 grit. Now 300 is pretty low. That's a really coarse stone, and I would only use that if I had like some big malfunction in my blade, some large nick or something like that where I had to really reset the edge. If I was at that place, I would probably just take the knife to a professional to grind that out and then sharpen it the rest of the way myself. Once you have your stones, you need something to hold the stone in so that it's steady while you're sharpening. Now, for a long time, I use this stone holder, and this is just a cheap piece of rubber. It does an okay job of staying put, but the big malfunction with this is that it only fits the stone that I bought it with. So that doesn't really help me out because these stones are different sizes. So I ended up purchasing a stone holder, and I've got to be honest, it took me years to just go ahead and buy this. And it was one of those things that once I had it, I was like, why did I wait so long to do this? These are great. These work basically like a vise, and all you have to do is adjust the knobs at the end here to lengthen or shorten the holder, and then you can place your stone in there and it will be nice and tight, and they've got good rubber feet to keep things steady so that nothing's moving around, which you really don't want. It's not going to make a good consistent product and it can be dangerous. I also use, to keep my knife block steady, a drawer liner. These are really cheap, super easy to get. You can get them anywhere. And what I like about this is I can cut this to whatever size I need. So I've cut this just a little bit larger than my stone holder, and that's gonna keep everything really set in place. I love it. I also have a couple tea towels. Like I said, we're using water to sharpen these knives, and so I just use these to keep everything dry on my work surface. They come in really handy. I like to keep these towels specific to sharpening. We're gonna have metal filings and little pieces from the stone, and I don't want those to get into the fabric. Even if I wash it, I don't know, I just don't wanna take the chance that it can get into my food. And the last thing I wanna talk about is this, which is known as a stone flattener. So here's the deal. Over time, these stones will start to wear out. You're definitely taking metal off the knife, but you're also taking some material off of these stones, and they can begin to bevel. And that's where a stone flattener comes in handy. Now this is even coarser than my sharpening stones, and when I apply it to the stone itself, I flatten it out. This is not super necessary if you're not doing a lot of sharpening. If you're like most people and you've got some good knives that you want to keep sharp, you're probably sharpening them a couple times a month. You might need this once a year, once every couple of years. But if you've got a lot of knives that you sharpen all the time, then this could be a good purchase. You don't need to use this in between sharpenings, but once or twice a year, this might be helpful to make sure that everything is nice and true and flat. So the first step in getting our knives sharp, now that we understand what tools we need, is to soak these stones, okay? These are porous, and we wanna make sure that water is penetrating the whole stone so that we've got a nice smooth surface to sharpen on. So I have here just a little bit of room temperature water in a hotel pan, and I have just enough to submerge my stone. I'm gonna put my 1000 grit stone in here. And you'll notice when you put your stone in, it's gonna bubble up, and that's air escaping the stone. That's a really good thing. I'm gonna keep this in here for about 15 minutes, maybe 20, until it's well soaked, and then we can get started with sharpening. Those of you that have skipped ahead to the method and are just joining us, I've taken my 1000 grit sharpening stone and I've got it submerged in some room temp water for the last maybe 15 minutes or so, just so it gets nice and soaked. So now we're ready to start sharpening. I think it would be a good idea first to show the quality of the edge of this knife real quick, and everybody does it on a piece of paper because that's the coolest way. So as I hold this paper and I run the blade down, you can see that that does not catch an edge at all. It's got a really rough tear. I'm really more tearing the paper than cutting it. That's pretty bad. I think this knife really does need to get sharpened. I also forgot to mention, I'm wearing an apron. This isn't to be cool because I don't look cool. It's really because I'm gonna be splashing up possibly some metal filings and things, and I don't wanna get it on my clothes. That's what the apron's for. So I have my soaked sharpening stone. I'm gonna put it in my holder, and I am just going to tighten up this holder. It doesn't have to be real tight, just enough to keep this thing steady. Okay, that's good. Set on my base. We got a towel here. I'm gonna keep this water out because I might be adding water to the surface of the stone as I work. So the first thing that we need to do is get a proper grip on the knife. I like to hold the knife up towards the bolster, this area of the blade. I'm gonna keep my index finger pointed towards the cutting edge to give me some stability, and my thumb is along the spine of the blade. With my other hand, I'm gonna take just my fingertips to apply pressure when I'm working down the blade. And I'm gonna run my fingertips down the blade to always maintain pressure over the stone. I don't wanna be pressing on the tip of the knife when the base of the knife's on the stone, because I'm gonna flex that blade down and I could get a bad sharpen as a result. Now there's two main styles to sharpening a knife. There's a Japanese style and kind of a Western style, and they coincide with the shapes of those blades. Now in the Japanese style of sharpening, we're gonna just move the blade back and forth in a parallel motion, working down the blade. In a Western style, we're gonna have more of a curving action because it matches the curve of the blade back and forth. I use both styles. It just depends on what part of the knife I'm working on. As I work towards the base of this knife, I'm more of a Japanese style, and then working towards the curved edge, I might move into the Western style. It's just whatever's comfortable to you. We want to make sure that the angle of our knife edge to the stone is correct. Now this will take a little bit of practice. You're going to go between 12 to 15 degrees from the surface of the stone. And a couple good ways to guide that is maybe take a couple pennies and place them on the stone and then your knife onto that, or I like a matchbook. Now they do sell sharpening guides. It's a little piece of plastic that has just the right angle, and you can kind of stick it onto your knife. I don't really like using that. As you're working with it, you have to constantly adjust it. It doesn't work for smaller knives, so I think it's much better to get a feel for the correct angle on your own. Another thing that some people like to do is place the knife on the stone and move their fingers just to the intersection of the cutting edge and the stone itself and feel for when that angle hits. That works too. It's really about whatever works for you to feel comfortable. So I'm going to put a little bit more water on this stone and get started. I've got my proper grip on this side. I've got my fingers keeping pressure on the blade, and here's what we're going to do. As we pull back, we're going to press down, and as we press forward, we're releasing pressure. So I'm going to press and release, and press and release. And I'm just going to work this method down the blade, making sure to keep the same working angle. And like I said, as I get towards the tip of the blade, I like to work into a Western style because it matches that curve. And then we're going to start over and just work down the blade this way. Now, as you start to do this, you're going to immediately see dark filings from the metal of the knife mixing with the water on the stone. This is a good thing. I've seen some people recommend to keep those things clean from the stone, and I think that's a terrible idea. What's actually sharpening the blade is a mixture of the cutting stone, which is a silicone carbide, there'll be ceramic in there, and the metal filings of the blade itself that will create a slurry. And that slurry is working against the blade to sharpen it and polish it. So you want to keep all of that on there. As the stone dries out a bit, just go ahead and add a few drops of water. And work down the knife. Now, a natural question most people ask when they're starting to sharpen is, how much pressure should I be applying as I'm pulling that knife back? About 5 pounds of pressure is usually recommended. If you don't know what that feels like, the next time you're at a grocery store and you have one of those hanging produce scales, go ahead and put your hand in there and press down to see what 5 pounds is like. It's probably a little firmer than you think. Now, after a little while of sharpening, I am going to feel for a burr. I'm always going to feel for a burr on the side of the blade that's facing up, away from the stone. That burr represents sharpening on the other side of the knife. If we go back to that dull knife edge, as we sharpen one side of the blade, we're going to start to flatten that side out and reform that bevel. And as we're doing that, we're actually going to push metal over the edge onto the other side of the blade. That creates a burr, and that's what I'm feeling for right now. So I'm going to take my fingers and just carefully run them perpendicular to the knife edge, not parallel. That's how we cut ourselves. And I'm just going to feel for that burr running up the edge of the blade all the way down the blade. And I can just about feel it with this knife. This is a really dull knife. I'm going to work on this side of the blade until I can feel that burr all the way down. Now, the amount of time that takes depends on the knife. It depends on how dull it is, on your skill set in sharpening. Also depends on the material of the knife itself. More expensive knives will sometimes have a really hard steel. So you may find yourself working on a stone and not getting that burr right away. Don't give up, keep working on it. It may just mean that you have a hard steel in your blade. Once I feel that burr all the way down the blade, it's ready to work on the other side. Now, most people simply take the knife in their hands and turn it over, and then repeat the process with the blade facing towards them rather than away from them. You're going to take your dominant hand and maintain the same grip. Your thumb is going to be towards the cutting edge. Your fingertips on your support hand, same place. And now I'm going to press as I move away from my body and release pressure as I move towards my body. It's just the opposite of working the blade the first time around. I'm a little bit weird. I actually completely switch hands and then work on the other side of the blade. It's just what feels comfortable to me. I get the best results with that. So do what works for you. If it's easy enough just to flip the blade over, do that. But I like to switch hands. So I'm going to do that now. I think we're ready for the other side of this blade. And for anybody that is left-handed, you're going to see what this should look like for you. Just going to repeat that process and work down the blade. Since I'm now working on the opposite side of the knife, I check for the burr on the opposite side too. Remember, you're always going to look for the burr on the side of the blade that's facing up. So I can now feel a burr on this side. I'm going to flip the knife back over and just run it over the stone a few times to pull that burr off. And I feel no burr on either side, and now we're ready for the next stone. That next stone is my 6000 grit. This is a polishing stone, so I'll still be taking some material off the blade, but it's really just to hone that edge. I don't soak this stone. I simply add water to the surface as I need to. And right away, you're going to hear a difference in the sound of the stone. It's much denser. It's almost like polished marble. And instead of looking for a burr when I'm using my 6000 grit stone, I'm looking for shine on that cutting edge. If I took a look and caught the edge of this knife in the light here, it has kind of a satiny shine, but once I'm done polishing, it'll be really glossy. It's almost like chrome. That's what I'm looking for as I'm working back and forth on the blade. The method is the same. Same grip, applying pressure as I work towards the spine of the knife and releasing pressure as I work towards the cutting edge. Once I can see good polish all the way down the cutting edge, all the way to the tip, I'm ready to work on the other side. Again, I'm a weirdo, so I'm switching hands, but you would repeat the process just like with the 1000 grit stone, just flip it over. I've worked this blade on the polishing stone for about 3 or 4 minutes on both sides. I see a good polished edge here, and I think we're ready to test. Hopefully now we've got a nice sharp blade. Now that's all left to do is clean up. I like to rinse off my stones, I pat them dry, and then I leave them out to air dry overnight. It's really important that you get these stones completely dry before you put them back in that plastic box, because any moisture left in the stones is going to build up as humidity inside the box. It can create bacteria in your towels or on your drawer liner. It can even harm the stones, so make sure they're good and dry before you put them back in. With a little bit of practicing, you can get some great results sharpening your own knives. You may even have fun doing it, and at the end of the day, nobody's going to take better care of your knives than you. If you like this video, please like, comment, share, subscribe, all of those awesome things, and don't forget to turn on notifications so that you never miss another DFK video when it pops up. Until next time, I am Chef Scott for Devil's Food Kitchen.